It is said that some places do not truly sleep. They only grow quiet, as if waiting. A night wind moves through empty plains, and somewhere beneath the stars a river speaks in a tongue older than names. The water does not hurry. It slides past the dark ribs of the earth, past reeds that bow like listeners, past stones that remember hands. Beneath the silence, Babylon rests, not the Babylon of bright banners and trumpet calls, but the Babylon of moonlit bricks and sleeping gates, where the air tastes of dust and distant salt. We begin at the edge of it. Where memory fades, there's a threshold, an old gateway whose mouth is partly filled with sand, as though the desert has been slowly closing it with careful fingers. Broken glaze clings to fallen bricks, faint cobalt patterns, catching starlight like forgotten constellations. No crowds gather here. No torches sing. Only the wind, the river, and the hush of a city that once believed itself eternal. And then the first question arrives like a soft knock in the dark. Did the gardens ever stand here at all? The thought is tender, almost fragile. A wonder so praised that it became one of the world's 7 bright crowns, yet so elusive that it slips from the grasp the moment we reach for it. We look into Babylon's shadowed face and feel the shape of a contradiction. A city once praised as the navel of the world becomes a chamber of echoes, where every praise is also a veil. Whispers tell us of terraces rising like a green hymn above stone, of trees heavy with shade, of blossoms cooling the air, of leaves trembling above walls that had never known softness. It is said that water climbed upward, defying thirst and gravity, turning dry breath into mist. It is said the earth rose in steps, as if the land itself had been persuaded to become a mountain. And yet, when we listen closely to Babylon's own surviving voice, the silence is startling. Beneath the silence, the ruins do not speak plainly of hanging orchards. They speak of kings and conquests, of temples and walls, of canals and tribute. They speak of a city built to awe the world. But the gardens, this suspended paradise, hover at the edge of record, like a dream remembered only by strangers. So we walk slowly, as one might walk through a sacred hall. We pass through broken courtyards where moonlight pools and scattered patches. We follow old channels carved in stone, thin grooves like veins, wondering whether they once carried more than rainwater, whether they once carried a river's blessing. We pause beside collapsed vaults, their arches half buried, and imagine what might have rested above them, soil deep enough for roots, shade deep enough for sorrow. In forgotten corners of the earth, certain miracles are not loud. They are hidden in labor. If the gardens existed, they would not have been a single moment of splendor. They would have been a nightly ritual, hands turning, water lifting, channels whispering, clay pipes breathing. A wonder sustained by repetition, by unseen devotion. There is something holy in that thought, not the garden as a trophy, but the garden as a vow. It is said softly, carefully, that a king built it for a queen who missed the mountains. A love story sits within the legend like a small flame inside a vast temple. The queen, far from her homeland, gazes into a flat horizon that never rises. The king, powerful enough to carve cities into the earth, tries to carve comfort instead, stacking terraces like remembered hills, planting trees like borrowed clouds. Not conquest, but gentleness. Not war, but shade. And still, the uncertainty returns, patient and unblinking. As the chapter deepens, we meet the earliest voices, travelers, scribes, and distant historians, speaking with certainty that does not quite hold still. Their descriptions shimmer, then blur, like starlight on moving water. Some speak of arched foundations, others of vaults layered beneath soil. Some insist the gardens hung, others that they simply rose. The details shift, and in their shifting we sense the nature of the tale. A story carried across distance, polished by retelling, gilded by longing. The object of our devotion is not yet a garden, but a promise, a hanging world suspended against the sun. The promise is the true marvel, a refusal to accept the desert as final, a refusal to let thirst write the only ending. In this promise, Babylon becomes more than stone and empire. It becomes a symbol of the human desire to lift beauty above ruin, to grow softness where harshness reigns. But a promise is not proof. And so we come to the wall. It stands in fragments now, an ancient boundary softened by time, its edges worn like an old prayer. We lay our attention against it the way one might press an ear to a closed door. Beyond it is the city as it was. Beyond is the city as it is. And somewhere between those two, the gardens, real or imagined, continue to hang. Perhaps the gardens were here and vanished without leaving their footprint. Perhaps they were never here at all, and Babylon simply became the name that the world placed upon its longing. We pause beside the silent wall, feeling how easily a wonder can become a story, and how easily a story can become dust. The wind crosses the plain again, and the river continues its slow speech beneath the stars. The gate remains closed, but not locked, and as the night deepens, the question does not demand an answer. It only asks to be carried gently, like a lamp lowered into sleep. Perhaps it was never meant to be found. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. Marked by the moon, a lamp trembles in the dark. The scene opens with hands in shadow, lifting a clay tablet towards a small circle of light. The lamp is simple, oil-fed, patient, almost reverent, its flame bending whenever the night breathes. Beneath the silence, the room feels older than language, as if the walls themselves have been listening for centuries. A scribe leans close, and his breath warms the air as he presses a reed into soft earth. Each mark is a small incision into forgetting. Each wedge-shaped sign is placed carefully, like a stone set into a path that must not break. He is trying to pin a miracle to time. Outside, Babylon sleeps, not in glory, not in celebration, but in the hush that follows every empire once the torches are gone. Somewhere beyond the walls, the river moves like a slow, dark ribbon, carrying starlight on its back. Somewhere beyond the lamp, the desert waits, unhurried and faithful, ready to receive whatever is dropped. It is said that Babylon was a city of records, names of kings, counts of grain, lists of tribute, inventories of power. Clay tablets were its memory, stacked like quiet bricks, sealed and stored as if to outlast flesh. And yet, when we drift into the archives of what remains, the gardens, so famous in later telling, are strangely absent. This absence becomes our first forbidden doorway. How can the greatest of wonders leave so little trace in the city that supposedly cradled it? We move slowly through the palace corridors of memory, where inscriptions speak proudly of walls that could not be breached, gates that shone with glazed animals, temples that climbed toward the sky. Kings are named with ceremony. Wars are counted like beads. Victories are carved into stone, so they can never be denied. But the green terraces, the hanging world of shade and water, hovers just beyond official speech. Where memory fades, the silence grows meaningful. Perhaps it is nothing at all, simply the ordinary loss of tablets to fire, flood, and time. Perhaps the evidence lies buried deeper than our reach, still sleeping beneath collapsed vaults and sand. Or perhaps the gardens belong to a kind of truth that did not fit the language of empire. Because a garden is not an army. A garden is not a decree. A garden is softness. And softness is often the first thing history forgets. Whispers tell us the legend begins with tenderness. A ruler, surrounded by stone and ceremony, looks upon someone he loves and sees that even gold cannot console her. A queen from distant hills, so the story goes, misses the shape of mountains, the smell of wet earth, the quiet shade of trees that do not fear the sun. Babylon is magnificent, but it is flat. It is bright. It is relentless. So the ruler offers a promise, not written in a proclamation, but built, quietly, steadily, into terraces of stone and soil. He creates height where there is none. He stacks platforms like remembered slopes. He summons greenery to a land that thirsts. He tries to give her a homeland made of architecture and breath. The story feels intimate, like a lullaby told inside an empire. And yet every affectionate detail creates a contradiction. If this was built to be seen, why do the most direct witnesses remain silent? We pause with that question the way one pauses before a sealed door, listening for movement on the other side. The lamp flickers. The clay tablet remains warm. The scribe's reed continues its patient work. Beneath the silence, we begin to understand the gardens not only as a place, but as a symbol, an attempt to keep living softness suspended above a hard world. If the terraces existed, they would have required devotion that never slept. Water would need to rise again and again, carried upward through channels hidden in walls, through shafts and pipes and secret cavities. In the cool of night, attendants might have turned mechanisms with steady hands, coaxing the river upward as if by prayer. The miracle would not be a single moment. It would be a rhythm, a nightly ceremony of water and breath. We imagined dampness clinging to stone, the scent of earth deepened in shadow. We imagine leaves trembling in a place that should have been bare. We imagine the sound not loud, not celebratory, only the hush of water arriving where it does not naturally belong. And then, as quietly as it begins, doubt returns, because gardens vanish differently than temples. A temple leaves pillars, a wall leaves foundations. A garden, if neglected, returns to dust without a ruin dramatic enough to satisfy the eye. Soil spills, roots rot, wood collapses into the earth. The green hem fades, and only stone remains, staring without explanation. Perhaps that is why the legend survives so easily. It is a wonder that can disappear without leaving a clear wound. Perhaps it was never meant to be proven. The scribe finishes a line and pauses. The reed lifts. The lamp breathes. In the distance, Babylon's sleeping gates do not open. They only hold their quiet, as if keeping a secret for someone who has not yet learned the right way to ask. In the final reflection, the light dims. The tablet remains warm, but the words refuse certainty. The promise lingers, unproven, yet strangely enduring, like perfume left in an empty chamber. It is said that some truths are not carved to be possessed. They are carried, softly, like water in the dark. Perhaps it was never meant to be found. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. Marked by the moon, a voice arrives from far away. It does not come on wheels. It does not come in marching lines. It comes as breath on parchment, as ink pressed gently into fiber, as a story carried across water, salted, softened, made luminous by distance. We begin with a distant voice, Greek and wondering, speaking of Babylon as if it were a dream glimpsed from far across the sea. In the hush, imagine a traveler pausing at the edge of the known. Not a conqueror, not a king, just a witness, or a listener, or perhaps only a collector of marvels. His sandals are dusted with long roads. His mind is full of maps. And when he speaks, his words do not strike like iron. They drift. It is said, he begins, because that is how so many ancient doors open. It is said there is a city where walls shine, where gates are adorned like living beasts, where the air itself carries the weight of history. And then the image, the one the world repeats. Terraces stacked like steps toward the moon, vines spilling over stone, blossoms heavy with fragrance, softening the sun. The gardens, in this telling, are not merely planted. They hang, as if the earth has learned to float. Where memory fades, this is the vision that remains. Not a technical plan, not an inventory, not a ledger, but a living picture. Green suspended above dust, shade hovering above heat, a miracle balanced upon brick. Whispers tell us the traveler cannot quite decide whether he is describing architecture or enchantment. He speaks of trees so tall they cast shadow, like a temple roof. He speaks of vaulted foundations, arches hidden beneath soil like ribs beneath skin. He speaks of water drawn upward, higher than thirst would allow, until the air itself feels cooled by impossible presence. It is beautiful, and the beauty is part of the mystery, because these vivid descriptions come mainly from outsiders, often writing long after the city's brightest hours. This is where the story begins to shimmer in a way that is both gentle and sharp. We follow their words as one follows a trail of petals across stone, but the petals are scattered by wind, and the stone beneath is older than certainty. Each account agrees in spirit, yet differs in detail. One voice describes terraces arranged like a mountain staircase, broad and deliberate. Another insists on a labyrinth of arches supporting deep layers of soil. One speaks of flowers and perfume. Another speaks of engineering and strength. Some place the gardens beside the palace. Others leave their location vague, as if the gardens themselves refused to be pinned to a single corner of the world. And so the contradiction becomes a soft pulse beneath the narrative. Are we hearing a memory, a rumor, or an ornamented echo meant to satisfy distant wonder? Beneath the silence, Babylon itself does not answer quickly. The city's own surviving tablets speak easily of kings, walls, conquests, of what an empire believes worth preserving. Yet the gardens, so loudly praised by distant tongues, remain strangely quiet within Babylon's own recovered voice. It is as if the most intimate miracle, shade offered in a harsh land, was never written down with the same pride as war. Or perhaps it was written and lost. Or perhaps it was never there, and the story found Babylon because Babylon was already famous enough to hold it. As we deepen, we move through the idea of Babylon as a canvas onto which the world painted its hunger for marvels. Some places become magnets for legend. Their names gather stories, the way night gathers stars. Babylon, already vast in reputation, could carry any wonder without collapsing beneath the weight. To speak of Babylon was to speak of the extraordinary. And so the gardens, whether real or imagined, found a safe home in that name. A green veil pulled over desert breath. We consider how stories travel. They do not travel as stone does. They do not travel as walls do. They travel like fragrance, like ash on wind, like song. A story crosses languages and becomes smoother. It crosses generations and becomes more radiant. It loses weight in the details, yet gains weight in the feeling. It becomes more beautiful when no one can verify it, because then it belongs to everyone. In the hush, you can almost see it happening. A traveler returns to a coastal city and speaks of Babylon. He describes the hanging terraces as if he saw them with his own eyes, even if he only heard of them in a marketplace. Another listener repeats the tale, adding a flourish, a higher terrace, a heavier vine, a more astonishing shadow. Another writer records it centuries later, not as certainty but as inheritance. So it is said. And the world nods, because the image satisfies something ancient and hungry in the human heart. We want to believe that beauty can be lifted above ruin. We want to believe that shade can be built where there is none. We want to believe that even empires, with all their hardness, can hold a quiet tenderness. And so the gardens hang, if not in air, then in imagination. In the closing hush, the traveler's voice fades. The scroll is rolled again. The lamp dims. The sea continues its slow breathing beneath the moon. What remains is the image of hanging terraces, suspended not in stone, not in Babylon's confirmed record, but in the mind's sacred chamber, still luminous, still unresolved. Perhaps it was never meant to be proven. Perhaps it was meant to be carried. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. The opening image is a map spread across a table, its edges curled like old leaves. An oil lamp burns low beside it, and the flame makes the inked river seem to move slowly, as if the page has its own quiet tide. Beneath the silence, dust gathers in the folds of parchment, and the names of cities rest like sleeping stones. Babylon, Nineveh. A fingertip traces the lines, walls, waterways, routes that once carried grain, armies, prayers. The finger lingers on Babylon, the famous name, heavy with echo. Then it drifts north, along a river's long spine, to Nineveh, another name, another empire, another chamber of forgotten grandeur. And somewhere between these 2 points, the line begins to tremble. Here the story turns softly. What if the gardens were never in Babylon at all? The question arrives like a secret whispered through a crack in time, small, almost polite, yet powerful enough to shift the weight of centuries. It does not slam doors. It only opens one, quietly, and invites us to step through without shoes, without certainty, without haste. It is said that legends cling to famous places the way vines cling to stone, not because stone asked for them, but because stone is there, visible, enduring, easy to name. Babylon was the name the world remembered, so the world placed its wonder there. But where memory fades, evidence speaks in strange ways, sometimes through what is present, and sometimes through what is missing. And this is what scholars of later ages began to notice: the mismatch between legend and local voice. Babylon's surviving inscriptions, so proud and precise in other matters, do not clearly sing of hanging terraces. The silence feels intentional, or accidental, or simply unresolved. We enter the chamber of alternate possibility, where history is not rewritten with violence, but reread with patience. The narrative focus becomes an unsolved displacement, an object that may have been moved by memory itself, a garden carried away, not by invading hands, but by the soft theft of repetition. We drift toward the north, not as travelers with baggage, but as listeners following a thread. The air changes in the imagination. Babylon's flat horizon begins to rise into the idea of hills. The names of Assyrian kings appear like carved shadows. And then, as if the earth itself has turned a page, we arrive at Nineveh. Whispers tell us Nineveh was not merely a city. It was a statement, a rival heartbeat of empire. Its palaces were lined with reliefs, its walls etched with scenes meant to outlast flesh. And here, unlike the hush in Babylon's record, stone speaks more openly of cultivated abundance. There are carvings of trees arranged like ceremony. There are depictions of water flowing with intention. There are inscriptions that praise canals and engineered lifelines. In Nineveh, the idea of a royal garden is not a rumor drifting in from across the sea. It is carved. It is said that one Assyrian king, powerful, ambitious, hungry for permanence, boasted of bringing water to places it did not belong, of shaping land into ordered beauty. The words do not need to be dramatic to feel immense. Simply to say, the water was guided here, the earth was made green, the palace was crowned with living softness. The deep exploration becomes meditative. We imagine the flow of water as a sacred act, guided through channels hidden in walls, lifted with patient ingenuity, delivered with the same devotion as incense carried to an altar. We picture aqueducts spanning distances, like stone prayers. We picture cisterns holding cool darkness. We picture the hush of night labor, the careful turning, the constant tending, so that by morning, shade could exist where shade should not. And through it all, the language remains soft, because the miracle is not only in height, but in persistence, not only in beauty, but in care. Yet the contradiction sharpens, steady and unblinking. Why did the world attach the garden to Babylon's name when another city may have held the living proof? Perhaps because Babylon's fame was older in the imagination of Greek writers. Perhaps because Babylon became a symbol large enough to swallow other truths. Perhaps because stories travel by the easiest road, through names already known, through places already crowned by myth. Or perhaps, more quietly, because the gardens were never a single fixed thing. Perhaps they were a style of wonder, a royal dream repeated in different capitals, each empire longing to prove it could defeat the desert and command the river. Perhaps Babylon had its own cultivated terraces now lost, while Nineveh preserved its boast in stone. Perhaps both cities held echoes of the same human hunger, to build paradise where it does not naturally grow. Where memory fades, certainty becomes less important than the shape of the longing. In the final reflection, we return to the map. The lamp is burned lower. Shadows pool at the table's edge. Dust has settled in a thin veil across the ink. Babylon and Nineveh remain where they always were, but the line between them feels newly alive. No longer a route, but a question. The map feels less like certainty and more like a veil. The thread has turned, not snapped. The gardens remain, perhaps relocated, perhaps misnamed, still hanging, now between two cities, in the quiet space where history and longing overlap. Perhaps it was never meant to be pinned to one place. Some wonders live best at the border of proof. where the mind can wander and sleep can come, carrying the question gently into silence. Beneath the silence, there's a room that feels like a breath held gently. Not a room of laughter, not a room of loud discovery, but a museum-like hush, dim, reverent, where even footsteps would seem too sharp, and the air itself carries the patience of centuries. In that hush, we face carved stone that holds its breath. A relief panel rises from the dark like a doorway made of memory, weathered yet precise. Its surface is worn in places, softened by time, but the lines remain deliberate. Palms with fronds fanned like quiet prayers, pathways etched like riverbeds, channels curling like ribbons across the scene. Trees are planted with intention, their carved trunk steady, their carved leaves repeating in pattern calm. The object of mystery is no longer only a rumor. It is an image set in stone, an echo that survived when gardens did not, marked by the moon, or by the careful flame of lamplight. The chiseled grooves catch shadow, and the shadows make the carvings move in the mind. It is easy here to imagine water flowing again, easy to imagine footsteps padding softly along shaded paths, easy to imagine a royal garden not as a floating miracle, but as a designed landscape, an arranged abundance, shaped by hands that believe the world could be instructed to bloom. Where memory fades, stone becomes a witness. And stone, unlike parchment, does not blush. It does not exaggerate to entertain. It does not sweeten itself for strangers. It simply endures, keeping what it was asked to keep. The chapter's focus is on what stone chooses to remember. If Nineveh's walls speak of orchards and watered terraces, the gardens may have been less a hanging wonder and more a royal landscape engineered into sacred display. The relief does not show vines defying gravity. It shows order. It shows control. It shows channels shaped with care, as if the river itself had been persuaded into obedience. We glide through this thought slowly, like drifting incense, because there is something both beautiful and unsettling in it. Empires kept gardens as a promise of mastery over the wild, a soft crown placed upon harsh power, a way of saying, even the desert can be made to submit, even thirst can be disciplined, even the sun can be answered with shade. It is said that in the ancient world, a garden was not merely pleasure. It was proof. Proof that a king could gather water, command labor, shape land, and bring life to places where life was fragile. Proof that the world could be arranged into a patterned piece, at least within the walls of a palace. But even in this, melancholy gathers like dust, because gardens live by breath and water, and empires live by conquest. Two rhythms that rarely harmonize for long. Beneath the silence of the relief, we begin to hear this quiet tension. The carved palms stand still, but in the mind they sway, because we know what stone does not say. Behind every channel, there was labor. Behind every terrace, there were hands. Behind every tree, there was an insistence against nature's refusal. And then the name of a king begins to appear like a faint inscription on the inner wall of thought. Not shouted, not announced, just present. One ruler in particular, an Assyrian king whose boasts were carved with confidence, spoke openly of waterworks, of canals stretched across distances, of bringing abundance to a palace like a divine gift held in stone. His inscriptions praised channels and growth, describing the guiding of water as an achievement worthy of eternity. In these words, the garden is not an accident. It is a project of power made beautiful. And here the unsolved phenomenon deepens, not only location, but transformation. How does a real garden become the legendary, hanging gardens through centuries of retelling? We can feel the turning. A carved terrace becomes a mountain of greenery. An aqueduct becomes a river lifted by magic. A palace orchard becomes a wonder suspended against the sun. Where memory fades, the story does what stories always do. It drifts toward the luminous. It trades grounded detail for a softer miracle. It becomes easier to carry when it becomes less specific, more shimmering, more dreamlike. Greek writers, Roman admirers, distant listeners, many spoke of the gardens with awe, describing them with the sweetness of separation. Their words gather fragrance the way a closed room gathers perfume. The longer the distance, the brighter the bloom. The more uncertain the evidence, the more perfect the image becomes. And Babylon, famous, heavy with echo, becomes the name the world chooses to hold the wonder. Even if the stone voice suggests another home, we listen, then, to two kinds of testimony. The later, more luminous myth, terraces hanging like moonlit steps, vines spilling like waterfalls of green, and the carved certainty, channels, trees, pathways, the deliberate geometry of an engineered paradise. Between them, a quiet contradiction breathes. And perhaps this contradiction is the point. Perhaps the gardens were never only a location. Perhaps they were a desire to lift softness above hardness, to place shade above heat, to believe that something living can be held, even briefly, against the ruin that waits for all things. In the final reflection, we return to dust, fine, pale, drifting across the floor of time. Stone can keep a shape, but it cannot keep perfume. It cannot keep shade. It cannot keep birdsong. The gardens, if they lived, have slipped into silence, leaving only the faint pressure of their memory on carved air. The relief remains, breathing quietly in the dark. And somewhere beyond it, the river continues its low, ancient speech. Perhaps it was never meant to be held completely. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. Beneath the silence, something moves. Not a footstep, not a voice. A quiet, upward motion, so improbable it feels like a dream the stone is having. The opening image is water climbing in darkness, as if the earth itself is inhaling. In a narrow corridor behind palace walls, where no banners hang and no sunlight lingers, the air is cool and close. The stones are damp to the touch, slick with mineral breath. Dust floats in the torchlight like slow snowfall. And there, within a vertical shaft, within the hidden veins of architecture, water rises. It does not rush. It does not splash. It simply ascends. As though persuaded, marked by the moon above, the city sleeps. But beneath it, this hidden river keeps its patient rhythm, lifting life toward a place that thirst would normally deny. Here the true miracle, if it existed, may have been invisible labor. The mystery centers on the method. How did water reach terraces, high above the ground in a world of heat and dust? We linger with the question the way one lingers in a sacred hall, without demanding an answer, only listening for the echo it leaves in the body. Above ground, legends speak of hanging greenery, of shade piled upon shade, of vines spilling over stone like soft waterfalls. But here in the unseen corridor, we sense the deeper truth. Every leaf that might have trembled in coolness needed water delivered, again and again, like a vow renewed. It is said that ancient hands understood water as both necessity and mystery. They measured it, guided it, stored it. Yet they also revered it, because in the dry lands, water is never merely water. It is mercy. It is power. It is life arriving where it should not. We move slowly through the idea of ancient hydraulic devotion. Channels carved into stone, cisterns holding darkness like a cupped palm, clay pipes fitted together with careful patience, and hinted at in later texts and inferred from surviving works, devices that could lift water upward, screws, pulleys, counterweights, mechanisms made from wood and rope and will. But the language remains gentle here, because even a machine can feel like a prayer when it is devoted to keeping something living alive. In the mind's eye, we see the hidden chambers, a reservoir below, cool and still, reflecting torchlight in trembling copper. We see worn grooves on stone where rope once passed night after night. We see spiral-cut channels, suggestions of a turning path, where water might have been coaxed upward in a steady climb. And we imagine sound, not loud, not triumphant, only the hush of water being moved, the soft creak of wood, the slow breath of effort. Whispers tell us of attendants turning quietly in the night. No crowds watching, no poets applauding, just the constant, unseen work of lifting a river against gravity. The city above sleeps in the confidence of its walls. The palace above rests in silence. And below, in the dark, the ritual continues so that morning can arrive with leaves still wet with coolness. This is the sacred contradiction at the heart of the gardens. Life raised above life's usual reach. A green world suspended against heat, held up not only by stone vaults, but by devotion. The deep exploration layers myth and memory. Some accounts speak of arches filled with soil, vaulted ribs supporting the weight of trees, carrying an impossible softness on disciplined stone. Others describe chambers beneath the terraces, cool and shadowed, like the underside of a mountain that was built rather than born. In those shadow chambers, water would have traveled like a secret, guided through hidden channels and side walls, stored in cisterns like kept breath, released into planting beds with careful timing. The forbidden knowledge is not explosive. It is intimate. The wonder may have been sustained by constant unseen effort, by a nightly ceremony performed for an audience of no one, except the plants themselves, and the one person the garden was meant to comfort. Where memory fades, legends often erase labor and keep only glow. The story becomes effortless. A king commands, and paradise appears. But beneath the silence, the truth, if it was ever true, would have been slower. Hands would have tired. Ropes would have frayed. Water would have resisted. And still the ritual would return each night, because promises are not maintained by words. They are maintained by repetition. We pause, listening to that, thoughts settle. If the gardens were real, they were not only built once. They were rebuilt every night. And yet, as with all things sustained by devotion, the question of ending hovers nearby. What happens when the hands stop turning? What happens when the rope is cut by time? When the cistern cracks? When the empire shifts its attention elsewhere? In the final reflection, we listen to the silence after the water stops. The corridor remains. The wall stands. The clay pipes remain open-mouthed, waiting. The shaft is still. The damp stone dries slowly, leaving pale mineral scars like ghost rivers etched into the dark. History often preserves the crown of a story, but loses the hands that held it up. What remains is the feeling of hidden rivers. How much of the ancient world moved in secret, beneath the surfaces we can name? Perhaps the gardens were held aloft by a river no one saw. Perhaps the river was the true wonder all along. And even now, unseen, it keeps moving. Somewhere beneath the ruins, beneath the dust, beneath the silence, carrying the dream forward softly into sleep. Beneath the silence, a window waits. It is tall and arched, set into walls of brick that once held the warmth of lamps and the perfume of oil. Moonlight spills across the stone sill in a pale ribbon, and dust gathers there like a soft veil. Beyond the opening, the world is flat, so flat it feels endless, an expanse of plain and river mist under a sky pricked with distant stars. It is said that even the greatest cities cannot change the shape of the horizon. Inside this chamber, no voices rise, no sandals cross the floor. Yet the air holds something that lingers, an invisible presence, as gentle and heavy as longing. The room feels like it has been listening for centuries. And in the mind's hush, we see her, not as a loud figure in gold, but as a quiet silhouette, someone standing at the window, staring out into a land that refuses to rise. The opening question arrives with tenderness. Was the garden's true root not power, but homesickness? Where memory fades, the legend becomes human. Soft, melancholy, familiar. The most repeated story does not begin with conquest or spectacle. It begins with a private ache, an ache that does not announce itself. The queen, so the whispers tell us, came from a homeland of hills and mist. She knew the comfort of slopes, the way mountains hold the sky closer, the way cool air gathers in valleys like a blessing. She knew the scent of wet earth after rain, the hush of green places where shade is not engineered, but simply given. Babylon, by contrast, was bright and flat and powerful. A city of walls and gates, of heat and ceremony. A city that glittered with order. A city praised by distant tongues as the heart of the world. And yet, for someone who missed mountains, it could feel like a wide, unbroken exposure. Beautiful, but unrelenting. Beneath the silence, we sense the loneliness that can exist even at the center of everything. So the story turns toward tenderness. A ruler, named clearly in some tellings, unnamed in others. looks upon this quiet grief, and tries to answer it not with jewels, not with feasts, not with words, but with a landscape rebuilt. He offers greenery like a bridge back to a distant homeland. He offers shade like a soft apology. He offers height, because height is what our eyes have been asking for. It is said he commanded the earth itself to rise, not into a fortress, not into a monument of fear, but into terraces, layered steps of stone and soil, each one a remembered slope. We move through the palace not as spectacle, but as private refuge, a place where the air might change, where the sun might soften, where water might be heard in quiet channels, moving like prayer through hidden walls. The terraces become a lullaby built in levels, each platform a gentle ascent, each pathway a slow turning of the thread, each tree a fragment of another sky. In this telling, the gardens are an offering shaped like forgiveness. Here, the gesture seems to say, let the earth rise for you. And yet, even as the legend comforts, it also invites a sacred uncertainty. We do not insist the queen's name is certain, nor the king's. Across centuries, the story shifts its garments, different names, different details, different emphases. Some versions anchor the tale in Babylon, others drift north toward Nineveh. Some speak of love, others speak of royal display. Some describe terraces hanging like miracles, others describe vaults and channels and disciplined stone. So we let uncertainty remain sacred, because uncertainty does not weaken the story. It reveals what the story is protecting, that even in the center of empire, someone could feel small and displaced, that power cannot always soothe the private weather of the heart, that a person might crave not gold, but a familiar horizon. And perhaps this is why the tale endured so easily. Babylon, in history's harsher light, is often remembered for might, for domination, for the proud architecture of control. The romantic version, this queen, these gardens, softens the city like a veil. It offers a gentler face to a name that otherwise feels severe. The contradiction returns, calm and careful. If this tale is so perfect, perhaps it is too perfect. Polished by generations who needed romance to make the legend easier to carry. Enhanced by distant voices who preferred a love story to the rougher truth of labor and empire. The gardens become not only a place, but moral perfume, proof that even great power can be tender. And yet, beneath the silence, longing does not require proof. Longing is real even when its object is uncertain. Whether the gardens existed or not, the ache that birthed them is believable, because it is human, because it is timeless, because it continues quietly in every heart that has ever stood in a beautiful place and still missed another. In the closing hush, the chamber remains. The window still opens onto the flat horizon. The night wind still moves across the plain. The river mist still curls like breath under the stars. The queen's gaze, whether she was real or only a shape in legend, remains on the distance. And the story does not demand a conclusion. Perhaps the terraces truly rose, layered with shade. Perhaps they never rose at all, and only the yearning did. But longing, unlike stone, endures. It is said that some truths do not live in inscriptions. They live in the quiet places we return to in the mind, marked by the moon, where memory fades, and sleep arrives like a soft green veil. Perhaps it was never meant to be found. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. Marked by the moon, the road becomes a ribbon of quiet. The opening image is a caravan moving under starlight, carrying spices, cloth, and stories. We do not see faces. We do not hear voices clearly. We only sense passage, the soft indentation of footprints in sand, the faint drag of rope, the hush of bundles settling. A few embers glow low in a fire pit left behind, and the wind moves over them like a careful hand, dimming what remains. Beneath the silence, the world feels vast and listening. This is where wonders travel, not as monuments, not as stone carried on wagons, but as whispers, light enough to cross borders, light enough to slip into new mouths, changing shape every time they are spoken. The hanging gardens, whether real, relocated, or imagined, become a shared mirage between Babylon and Assyria, between what was seen and what was heard. It is said that trade routes were not only roads for goods, they were arteries for belief. A caravan might carry pepper and lapis, dyed cloth and carved seals, but it also carried the quiet astonishment of distant places, the kind that clings to a traveler's tongue long after the dust has settled. And so we follow the path of memory, through merchants who measure profit with steady hands, yet still pause at a strange city wall with their breath held, through diplomats who learn the weight of names, and how a rumor can become leverage, through soldiers who march into foreign streets and return with new stories stitched into their silence, through scribes who take what they hear and press it into clay, trying to give the drifting world a fixed shape. Each one gathers fragments. There are terraces, someone says, as if repeating a prayer. There is water rising, another insists, voice softened by distance. There are trees above walls, a third adds, and the image blooms in the mind like a small green flame. The unsolved phenomenon is transmission itself. How a real garden in one city could be relocated by rumor into another city's fame. Because stories have gravity. Babylon's name, already heavy with myth, may have pulled the garden toward it like a tide. A wonder spoken near Nineveh might, over a few retellings, drift south in the imagination, settling into Babylon simply because Babylon was the city the wider world remembered. Where memory fades, the famous name becomes a vessel. We drift into that thought slowly, letting it settle like dust in moonlight. Imagine a traveler sitting beside an extinguished campfire, staring into the dark. The air is cool. The river is somewhere nearby, breathing mist. He speaks to another traveler, not to persuade, but to share. It is said, he murmurs, because that is how the mind protects itself from certainty, that in the great cities there are gardens built above stone, not beside the palace, but above it, as if the earth has been stacked into steps. The listener nods, already seeing it, and because the listener sees it, the image becomes more real. Tomorrow, when the listener repeats the tale, the terraces will be higher, the vines will be heavier, the water will climb more beautifully, the story will gain fragrance and lose weight at the same time, and so the gardens become less a coordinate on a map and more an emblem that can be carried. The deep exploration is meditative and layered. Empires compete not only with armies, but with symbols. A garden is not merely beauty, it is a claim that the world can be rearranged into abundance. That thirst can be answered. That wilderness can be disciplined into shade. That a ruler's reach extends even into the secret language of plants and water. To say you have such a garden is to say your empire is blessed, or at least powerful enough to imitate blessing. We drift through the idea that the hanging gardens might be less a single place and more a title, a ceremonial image assigned to whichever capital needed it most. Perhaps Babylon wore it because Babylon was already crowned with grandeur in foreign minds. Perhaps Nineveh wore it in stone, carving channels and orchards into relief, insisting with quiet confidence, "This is what we built. This is what we commanded." And perhaps the truth is braided, part Babylon, part Assyria, part imagination, part loss. History is not always a straight road. It is often a river that braids, separates, and meets itself again, carrying the same shimmer under different names. In the final reflection, the caravan disappears into darkness. The footprints soften beneath wind. The embers die. The bundles are gone. The road remains, empty and listening beneath the stars. But the stories remain. They hover like dust in moonlight, fine, drifting, impossible to grasp, yet impossible to deny. Somewhere in a faraway city, someone will say Babylon and picture green terraces. Somewhere else, someone will say Nineveh and remember carved stone that shows canals like ribbons. The echoes will cross again and again until the origin becomes less important than the longing the echo carries. Perhaps the gardens were never meant to belong to one city alone. Perhaps they were meant to travel, softly, endlessly, as a dream of shade in a world of heat. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. We open with falling, softly, almost kindly, not the sudden fall of a tower, Not the roar of stone collapsing in a single violent hour, but a quieter descent, the kind that happens while no one watches, the kind that happens in the spaces between seasons. A leaf loosens its grip. It turns once in the air, slow as a sigh, and settles on a stone step that still remembers coolness. Dust gathers around it like a thin veil. Somewhere nearby, a channel meant to carry water holds only silence and silt. Beneath the silence, the gardens, if they stood, begin to surrender. First, the water becomes uncertain. A groove once cut with intention begins to clog with fine debris. Mineral crust thickens like a pale scar. A clay pipe, once fitted with careful patience, cracks and dries. And because the garden's miracle was never truly the greenery alone, but the constant arrival of water, the first failure is not loud. It is an absence. It is said that living wonders do not collapse the way temples do. A temple leaves pillars. A wall leaves foundations. But a garden is made of breath and moisture, of soft things that return easily to the earth. Soil scatters. Roots rot. Leaves fall, then fall again, until the branches are bare. The birds move on without ceremony. Stone may remain, but life does not leave behind a ruin that satisfies the eye. So the descent continues as an evaporation rather than an explosion. We move through this unmaking slowly. A terrace platform remains, but the planting bed becomes lighter with every wind. A once shaded corner grows hot. The air loses its cool scent. The sound of water, if it was ever there, fades into the mind's memory more than the ear's present. The garden's rhythm depended on unseen devotion, night after night. And devotion, like water, can be diverted. Babylon's fortunes shift. Power changes hands. The attention of rulers turns elsewhere. Walls that were maintained begin to crumble at the edges. Names that were spoken with certainty begin to be spoken with caution, or not at all. Nineveh, too, moves toward its own silence, its palaces swallowed by war and burial, its carved reliefs sealed under earth like sleeping witnesses. Beneath the silence, rivers change their beds. What once flowed near a city might drift away, inch by inch, as if the water itself is turning its face from the stones. The careful breath of irrigation becomes a forgotten song. Channels fill, cisterns dry, and without water, the miracle cannot stay suspended. Where memory fades, the garden becomes less a place than a feeling, an idea slipping loose from the ground. And still, the contradiction deepens. Texts preserve the wonder long after the cities that might have held it fall into silence. Greek and Roman voices speak of hanging terraces with steady awe, sometimes centuries after Babylon's brightest hour. Descriptions continue as if the green world still stands, as if vines still spill, as if shade still gathers in layered steps. How does a wonder remain so vivid when the place itself has gone quiet? Perhaps because stories do not decay the way gardens do. Perhaps because the imagination irrigates what the earth no longer can. We picture it, a faraway room, lit by a small lamp. A scroll is opened. A reader leans in close. The words Babylon appear, and immediately the mind builds terraces, fresh, green, impossible. The reader smells blossoms that are not there. The reader hears water that does not flow. The story becomes a kind of private garden, grown in the warm chamber of thought. The gardens become a ghost sustained by reading lamps in faraway rooms. And then, as quietly as the leaf first fell, we imagine travelers arriving too late. They stand at the edge of ruins, broken gates, wind-worn mounds, scattered glazed shards catching sunlight like old stars. No terraces rise. No hanging vines greet them. Only dust and open sky. Yet they still speak of greenery, because the story has already taken root in their minds. Beneath the silence, this is how legends survive. They replace the absent world with an inner one. In the closing reflection, the descent completes itself. Dust settles on thresholds. Sand gathers in corners where water once cooled stone. A terrace becomes only a shape. A channel becomes only a scar. The cities, Babylon, Nineveh, fade into the same quiet that claims all constructed beauty. And yet the idea of the gardens remains strangely alive. like a seed that refuses to die, waiting in darkness, waiting in dust, waiting in the soft space between proof and longing, until someone somewhere reads the name again and feels the world rise into terraces in the mind. Perhaps it was never meant to survive as stone. Perhaps it was meant to survive as a dream. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. Marked by the moon's last breath, dawn arrives without ceremony. The opening image is dawn over an empty mound of earth, the kind that hides whole palaces beneath its skin. The air is pale and cool, softened by mist. A single bird crosses the lightning sky, a dark brushstroke moving slowly from one silence to another. Beneath the silence, the land does not explain itself. It simply rests. Here, where the world looks ordinary, sand, wind, faint river haze, we return to the simplest question, and we set it down gently, like an offering. Where did the gardens go? We allow the question to remain unanswered without discomfort, because some mysteries are not doors that must be forced open. They are rooms we are meant to sit within, quietly, until our breath slows. This chapter gathers the threads with a calm hand. Babylon's silence, its surviving records heavy with kings and walls, yet strangely quiet about hanging greenery. Nineveh's stone voices, reliefs and inscriptions that speak more plainly of canals, orchards, and crafted abundance. The outsider accounts, Greek and Roman wonder, written with distance in the ink, carrying the scent of marvel across centuries. The human longing, the queen at the window, the horizon that refused to rise, the ache for mountains and mist, the hidden river within walls, the unseen water lifted upward by nightly devotion, making shade possible against heat. We hold these threads together, not to tie them into a knot of certainty, but to feel their texture. It is said that history is a kind of weaving. Sometimes the pattern is clear. Sometimes the strands cross in ways the eye cannot follow. Where memory fades, we often reach for proof the way a thirsty hand reaches for water. Yet proof, in ancient dust, is not always offered. Tablets crack, rivers shift, cities sink into their own silence, gardens vanish without leaving bones. So we choose a gentler ritual. We bless the uncertainty. We treat mystery as a sacred room rather than a problem, because wonders can be real and still become myth. And myth can contain truths even when the details blur. A garden could have existed, rooted in stone terraces, sustained by channels and labor, and still become hanging in the imagination, lifted into the air by the poetry of retelling. Or the garden could have belonged to a different city, its image wandering into Babylon's name because Babylon was heavy enough to hold it. Or perhaps the hanging gardens were never a single garden at all. Perhaps they were a title, a ceremonial image passed between empires like a crown, claimed by whoever needed to say, "We can make the desert bloom. We can command water. We can build shade." And beneath all of these possibilities, the deeper truth remains quietly human. The hanging gardens may represent a universal ache, to lift something living above the dust, to create shade where there is none, to build a small paradise against the vast heat of time. Whether the terraces were Babylonian, Assyrian, or purely imagined, they reveal what ancient hands desired. Not only power, not only wealth, but softness, beauty, an enduring green breath held aloft for a little while. Beneath the silence, that desire feels close to us still, because we too try to build small gardens against our own harshness, quiet rooms, gentle promises, places where the mind can rest. We too want to believe that something tender can be made to last. As we deepen, the world grows simpler. The mound remains under dawn light. The bird is gone. Wind moves across sand, leaving soft spirals. Somewhere unseen, the river continues its old, slow speech, and the mist lifts like breath. We realize that the gardens, if they were ever physical, have already returned to earth. Soil scattered, roots dissolved, leaves fallen and forgotten. Stone can keep a shape, but it cannot keep birdsong. And yet, the gardens have not vanished entirely. They hang where they belong, between starlight and stone, between memory and earth, not as a pinned coordinate on a map, but as an image suspended in the quiet part of the human mind. Terraces of shade, water arriving in secret, greenery rising where it should not. In the final reflection, we let the story settle. No verdict, no forced conclusion, only a gentle release into wonder. The last image is soft. Water that may no longer rise in hidden shafts, yet is still heard in the mind, flowing quietly through the chambers of sleep. Perhaps it was never meant to be found completely. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen.